You know that feeling when you're sitting with your closest friends, and everyone's laughing at inside jokes you don't quite get? When conversations happen at a pace that leaves you scrambling to catch up? When you look around the table and realize you're the only one feeling like you're on the outside looking in? You're not alone. And according to neuroscience and psychology, your brain might actually be experiencing friendship in a completely different way than everyone else around you. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change how you understand those moments of disconnection and alienation you've felt within your own social circles. Here's the thing that nobody really talks about openly. Feeling like an outsider in your friendships doesn't mean you're unlikable. It doesn't mean you lack social skills or that something's inherently wrong with you. It definitely doesn't mean you should just try harder or change who you are to fit in. But there is something genuinely fascinating happening in your brain that's completely different from people who feel naturally integrated into their friend groups. Let's start with the most obvious question. Why do some people feel like they belong everywhere while others feel like strangers, even surrounded by their closest friends? The answer starts with something called social baseline theory. Your brain is constantly comparing your current social position to what it perceives as the optimal position within a group dynamic. For most people, when they're with friends, their nervous system settles into a state of safety and connection. But for people who feel like outsiders in their friendships, something different happens. Even in moments of genuine connection, part of their nervous system remains in a state of vigilance. It's like there's a quiet alarm system in the background, constantly monitoring whether you truly belong or whether you're about to be discovered as someone who doesn't fit. This isn't paranoia, this is neurobiology. Research from Stanford University found that people who experience chronic feelings of social exclusion show different patterns of neural activation in the anterior insula and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. These are the regions associated with pain perception and social threat detection. Think about that for a moment. Your brain is literally treating social exclusion the same way it treats physical pain. When you feel like you don't belong with your friends, your brain is sending out alarm signals similar to what happens when you touch a hot stove. But here's where it gets interesting, because there are actually several different types of outsider experiences within friendships, and they stem from different psychological mechanisms. The first type is what we might call the observational outsider. These are people whose brains are wired to notice everything. They process social information more deeply and more slowly than their friends. While everyone else is caught up in the immediate moment, laughing at a joke, the observational outsider is analyzing the social dynamics. They're noticing that one person's laugh sounds a little forced. They're picking up on the subtle tension between two friends who seem fine on the surface. They're aware of the hierarchy within the group, who speaks first, who gets interrupted, whose opinions seem to matter more. This heightened processing comes from something called sensory processing sensitivity. A landmark study by Dr. Elaine Aron found that about 15 to 20% of the population has this trait. Their brains are simply wired to pick up on more information from their environment. The problem is that while this deeper processing can make you an incredibly perceptive friend, someone who truly understands what others are going through, it also means you're constantly noticing things that make you feel separate. You notice when you're the one who always listens but rarely gets asked how you're doing. You notice when plans change and you're the last to know. You notice the subtle exclusions and the assumed knowledge that you're somehow supposed to have magically acquired. And here's the thing about having a sensitive processing brain. You remember these moments, you catalog them, and over time they build up into a narrative where you start to believe that maybe you never really belonged in the first place. The second type of outsider experience is what we might call the asynchronous friend. These are people whose internal rhythms don't match the rhythms of their friend group. Maybe your friends are night people, and you're wired to be a morning person. Maybe they love spontaneity, and you need planning and structure. Maybe they process emotions quickly and move on, while you need time to think things through. There's actually solid neuroscience behind this. Your circadian rhythms, your temperament, your processing speed, these are all largely determined by your neurobiology. And when you're fundamentally out of sync with the people you're trying to be close to, it creates a kind of invisible friction. Neurotransmitter research has shown that people with different baseline levels of dopamine, serotonin, and cortisol tend to have different social preferences and rhythms. Someone with naturally higher dopamine might crave novelty and stimulation, while someone with different neurochemistry might prefer depth and consistency. This doesn't mean you can't be friends with people who are different, but it does mean that maintaining the friendship requires more conscious effort and more understanding from both sides. The third type is what researchers call the value-divergent outsider. These are people who care deeply about things that their friends don't care about. Maybe you're passionate about social justice, while your friends seem content to ignore systemic problems. Maybe you care deeply about the environment, while your friends are ambivalent. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe you love classical music, and your friends love Top 40. Maybe you're obsessed with philosophy, and they want to talk about reality television. Maybe you're trying to be healthier while everyone else is partying every weekend. When your values diverge from your friend group, something interesting happens in your brain. A 2020 study from the University of Michigan found that people who are isolated due to value differences experience something called cognitive dissonance on a social level. Your brain wants to both maintain the friendships and stay true to your values. But these two things feel incompatible, so you end up spending time with people you care about while feeling like you're pretending to be someone you're not. The result is a kind of emotional exhaustion. You're constantly translating yourself, filtering yourself, showing only the parts of yourself that you think your friends will accept. The fourth type is what we might call the timing outsider. These are people whose major life transitions don't align with their friends' transitions. Maybe you got married or had kids while your friends were still single and partying. Maybe you're dealing with mental health challenges while everyone around you seems fine. Maybe you got your dream job while your friends are still struggling to find their way. Maybe you experienced loss or trauma while your friends' lives remain relatively stable. Life transitions create what researchers call social identity shifts. When you go through a major transition, your sense of self changes. And if your friends aren't going through similar transitions at the same time, they can't fully understand what you're experiencing. Studies have shown that people in different life stages struggle to maintain close friendships even if they have deep history together. The shared understanding that once bonded you becomes less relevant when you're living in completely different realities. Now, here's something that sounds contradictory, but is actually really important to understand. People who feel like outsiders in their friendships often experience heightened empathy. Research from the Max Planck Institute found that people who feel socially excluded actually show increased activity in their empathy networks. It's like your brain compensates for the pain of not belonging by trying harder to understand and connect with others. You become hyper-aware of other people's feelings, sometimes even more aware of their emotions than they are themselves. But here's the paradox. This empathy often goes unreciprocated. Your friends don't notice how hard you're trying to understand them because they're not experiencing the same level of effort to understand you. It's like you're bringing a full cup to a friendship, pouring everything you have into understanding and supporting your friends, but they're only bringing a teaspoon. And over time, that imbalance starts to feel lonely. There's actually research on this too. A study by Dr. Harriet Coffin at Oxford found that people with high empathy who feel excluded in their social groups experience something called empathy fatigue. They become emotionally drained from constantly trying to connect with people who don't seem to be trying as hard in return. But let's talk about something else that's really important. Sometimes feeling like an outsider in your friendships isn't about your brain being different. Sometimes it's about the friendships themselves being unhealthy or mismatched. Not every friend group is right for every person. Some friend groups are built on exclusion. Some are hierarchical, with clear insiders and outsiders. Some are just fundamentally incompatible with who you are. There's a phenomenon that researchers call relational wealth. Some people have the capacity to make lots of friends and maintain multiple social circles, but other people are wired for depth over breadth. They can only maintain a few close friendships, and they need those friendships to be deeply authentic. When a person who needs depth is trapped in a friend group that values breadth and surface-level connection, they're always going to feel like an outsider. Your brain is literally telling you something important. It's telling you that this group doesn't meet your needs. It's telling you that you need something different. And here's what makes this complicated. Your brain is also desperately trying to maintain the friendships because connection is a human survival need. For thousands of years, being excluded from your group meant potential death. Your tribe protected you from predators and hunger and disease. So even if a friend group isn't good for you, your nervous system is still activating that ancient survival programming, desperate to maintain the connection at all costs. This is why people often stay in friendships that make them feel terrible. It's not because they're weak or because they're not trying hard enough. It's because there's a deep biological drive to maintain group belonging. But let's talk about what happens in your brain when you do feel like an outsider in your friendships. And this is where it gets really interesting because the experience is more complex than just feeling sad or lonely. Your brain actually enters into something that researchers call a monitoring mode. You become hypervigilant about social cues. You notice every pause in conversation, every glance exchanged between other people, every laugh that might be directed at you. This is partly adaptive. If you genuinely are in an unsafe social situation, being alert to social cues could protect you. But when you're in a moderately healthy friend group, but your brain is still in threat detection mode, you start to misinterpret neutral signals as hostile. A study from the University of Toronto found that people who chronically feel excluded tend to interpret ambiguous social situations as rejections. If a friend doesn't text you back right away, your brain interprets it as evidence that they don't care about you, even if they're just busy. If a friend makes plans without you, your brain interprets it as exclusion, even if they simply didn't think you'd be interested. If a friend is quiet in a group conversation, your brain assumes they're judging you, even if they're just having a quiet day. This is called negative interpretation bias, and it's a direct result of your brain trying to protect you from further social pain. The problem is that this protective mechanism becomes self-fulfilling. Because you're interpreting everything your friends do through a lens of exclusion, you start to withdraw. You contribute less to conversations. You initiate plans less often. You share less of yourself. And when you withdraw, your friends have less to work with. The friendship becomes shallower because you're not giving them the opportunity to know the real you. So your brain's attempt to protect you from rejection actually creates the rejection it's trying to prevent. This is one of the most painful aspects of feeling like an outsider in your friendships. Not only are you experiencing the original pain of not belonging, but you're also creating additional distance between yourself and your friends through your protective behaviors. Now let's talk about something that's really important to understand about personality and friendship compatibility. There's something in psychology called the Big Five personality traits. One of these traits is called neuroticism, and it's associated with the tendency to experience negative emotions like anxiety and sadness. Another trait is called extroversion, and it's associated with sociability and comfort in social situations. A third is called conscientiousness, which is associated with organization and planning. Here's the thing. If you score high on neuroticism and your friends score low, you're going to experience the world very differently. While they're bouncing through life relatively untroubled, you're noticing every potential problem and catastrophe. While they're moving quickly and spontaneously, you're planning and worrying about worst-case scenarios. There's nothing wrong with either approach. But when you're the neurotic person in a friend group of relaxed, easygoing people, you're going to feel like you're crazy. You're going to feel like you're the only one who's bothered by things that everyone else seems fine with. Research has shown that personality compatibility is actually one of the strongest predictors of friendship satisfaction. When your personality is complementary to your friends, the friendship feels effortless. When it's mismatched, the friendship requires constant work. And sometimes, no matter how much effort you put in, it's never going to feel natural. Your brain is telling you something real. You might actually be in the wrong friend group. But here's what's really important to understand. Just because you feel like an outsider doesn't mean you are actually less important or less valued than everyone else. Your brain might be lying to you about how much your friends care about you. There's something called the spotlight effect. It's the psychological tendency to overestimate how much people notice you and pay attention to you. If you're worried that your friends are noticing that you're quiet or awkward, the reality is they're probably barely noticing at all. They're too focused on their own insecurities and their own conversations to spend much time analyzing your behavior. You might feel like you're obviously not belonging, but your friends might have no idea you feel that way. This is actually where having an observant, sensitive brain works against you. You're noticing all the ways you don't fit, but everyone else is too caught up in their own experience to notice what you're noticing. So you're suffering alone with observations that everyone else is completely unaware of. This is why communication is so important. If you never tell your friends that you're feeling like an outsider, they have no opportunity to reassure you or to modify their behavior to make you feel more included. But here's the thing about communication. If you're the type of person who feels like an outsider, actually speaking up about it is terrifying. Because speaking up means being vulnerable. It means risking rejection. It means potentially confirming your worst fear that you actually don't belong. Your nervous system is probably going to fight against being vulnerable with your friends because vulnerability feels dangerous when you already feel excluded. But vulnerability is actually the bridge that connects outsiders to their friend groups. When you show your friends who you really are, what you're really struggling with, what you really need from them, you create the possibility of actual connection. And here's the thing. If your friends respond with kindness and understanding when you're vulnerable, then you have your answer. You do belong. You were just protecting yourself from the pain of connection. But if your friends respond with dismissal or judgment, then you also have your answer. And that answer is that you need to find friends who can meet you where you are. Now let's talk about something that's really important but often overlooked. The experience of feeling like an outsider in your friendships is deeply connected to your early attachment patterns. How your parents or caregivers responded to you when you were a child has a profound impact on how you show up in friendships as an adult. If you grew up with an insecure attachment, if your caregivers were inconsistently available or emotionally neglectful, your brain learned that connection wasn't safe. You learned that people might leave or reject you. And now as an adult, you carry that template into your friendships. Even if you're with genuinely kind, loyal friends, part of your nervous system is still operating from that old programming that says connection is dangerous. Research from the University of Illinois found that people with insecure attachment styles are significantly more likely to feel like outsiders in their friend groups, even when objective measures show that they are actually well integrated and valued. Your brain learned a specific lesson about belonging when you were young, and now it's constantly looking for evidence that confirms that lesson. This doesn't mean you're broken. It just means your nervous system is trying to protect you based on the information it learned a long time ago. But here's the hopeful part. Your nervous system can learn new information. Through repeated experiences of safe connection and genuine belonging, you can actually rewire those old attachment patterns. This process is called earned secure attachment, and research has shown that it's absolutely possible at any age. You don't have to be stuck with the nervous system patterns that were created when you were 5 years old. Let's talk about what actually happens in the brains of people who do feel genuinely secure in their friendships. Because understanding this can help you understand what you're working toward. People with secure attachment in their friendships show different patterns of neural activation in the regions associated with social approach and positive emotion. Their nervous system isn't in threat detection mode when they're with friends, it's in approach mode. They can be vulnerable without fear. They can ask for what they need without anxiety. They can show up authentically without worrying constantly that they're going to be rejected. This doesn't mean they never feel insecure or worried about their friendships, but it means they can tolerate that insecurity without it spiraling into a belief that they fundamentally don't belong. Now here's something that's really important for outsiders to understand. Some of the most meaningful and deep friendships in the world are built between people who initially felt like outsiders. There's something about the experience of not fitting in that creates profound empathy and understanding. When you felt the pain of exclusion, you become someone who never excludes others. When you felt invisible, you become someone who really sees people. People who felt like outsiders often become the most loyal, thoughtful, and genuinely connected friends. They're the ones who remember what you said weeks ago. They're the ones who notice when you're quiet and ask if you're okay. They're the ones who make sure nobody feels left out. The very qualities that made you feel like an outsider in one friend group are often the exact qualities that make you incredibly valuable in another friend group. Maybe you need to find your people. Maybe you need to find the friends who are also observant and sensitive. Maybe you need to find the friends who also feel a little bit like outsiders in the mainstream world. Because here's the thing that research consistently shows. People with similar personality traits and temperaments have significantly easier friendships. Not because there's something wrong with people who are different, but because being wired similarly means you understand each other without having to translate. You both prefer depth. You both need time to recharge. You both process emotions the same way. You both value the same things. And suddenly you're not working so hard to fit in. You're just being yourself, and it's exactly what your friend needs. This is why so many people who felt like outsiders throughout their lives suddenly found their community when they found the right people. It wasn't because they changed who they were. It was because they finally found people who were wired to appreciate who they were. Let me tell you something important, though. Just because you feel like an outsider doesn't automatically mean your friend group is the problem. Sometimes the problem is that you need to develop greater self-trust and self-worth that isn't dependent on constant external validation. Some people who feel like outsiders are actually victims of real exclusion and mistreatment. But other people who feel like outsiders are experiencing something called imposter syndrome at a friendship level. They're actually fully accepted and integrated into the group, but their brain is convinced they're not. Their self-doubt is so strong that no amount of evidence of belonging can convince them that they actually belong. This often comes from perfectionism. If you have perfectionist tendencies, your brain might believe that unless you're perfect, you don't deserve to belong. And since nobody is perfect, you're always going to feel like a fraud in your friendships. Perfectionism is a sneaky thing, because it looks like high standards, but actually it's often rooted in deep shame and a belief that you're fundamentally not good enough. If you're experiencing this, the work isn't necessarily finding new friends. The work is developing a more compassionate relationship with yourself. It's learning to accept that you're imperfect, and that imperfection is not only acceptable but actually necessary for genuine human connection. Because people don't actually want to be friends with perfect people. Perfect people are exhausting and boring. People want to be friends with real people. People with flaws and struggles and imperfections. When you show your friends your imperfections, they actually feel closer to you, not further away, because they get to let down their guard too. So here's what I want you to understand. If you've been feeling like an outsider in your friendships, your experience is valid. Your brain isn't broken. Your feelings aren't wrong. But your brain might be giving you incomplete information. It might be filtering out evidence of belonging and amplifying evidence of exclusion. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a moment and actually think about evidence of belonging in your friendships. Think about the times your friends have shown up for you. Think about the times they've asked about your day. Think about the times they've included you or remembered something you said. Write these moments down. Because when your brain is in threat detection mode, it's very good at ignoring evidence of belonging and focusing only on evidence of rejection. But if you actively gather evidence of belonging, you can start to give your nervous system permission to relax a little bit. And here's the second thing I want you to consider. Are your friendships actually healthy? Are these people worth your loyalty and your effort? Are they showing up for you the way you show up for them? Because sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes you're in friendships that are draining rather than nourishing. And in those cases, your brain is right to feel like an outsider. Your feelings are information. Listen to them. But don't let them become a story that defines you. You're not an outsider because something's wrong with you. You're an outsider because your brain is trying to protect you. And sometimes that protection is keeping you safe from genuinely unhealthy relationships. And sometimes that protection is just old programming that you don't need anymore. Either way, you deserve friendships where you feel like you belong. And those friendships are absolutely possible for you. They might look different than you expected. They might be smaller or more niche or less conventional. But they're out there. And when you find them, you'll finally understand what it means to come home in the middle of a friendship. You won't have to translate yourself. You won't have to wonder if you belong. You'll just be there, being yourself, and that will be enough. And that's actually the most profound human experience there is.